Welcome back, AP Bio. We're here to talk about the last section of Chapter 21 and natural selection. Friendly reminder about fitness. It's not how strong or tough or fast you are, but it's how many babies you make. Relative fitness is how many babies you make compared to others within a population. So here in this diagram, the bird on the right has a higher fitness and a higher relative fitness than the bird on the left because it's making more babies. It's making twice as many offspring. So let's look at a classic example of this. A famous study from Grant and Grant, who are a husband and wife ecology duo, and they were studying finch populations on an island in the Galapagos, which what a great vacation, just going down to the islands and measuring beaks. And what they did was they measured the beaks of as many birds as they could find on the island every year for decades, and were charting any changes they saw. And they noticed something in the mid-70s where there was a huge drought event in 1976, and this made food way more scarce. And so there was a lot more tough nuts and seeds, but not a lot of soft foods available. And what they found was after this big drought event, the average beak depth or beak size changed. Beaks got bigger on average in the population. They were just over 9 before 1976, and a couple years later, they were over 10 millimeters in size. So why would this have happened? What is our selective event here that's causing for birds to need larger, perhaps tougher, stronger beaks? Well, like so much in evolution, it comes down to competition, and food supply is our selective force. So with there being larger, tougher seeds available, they need those larger, tougher beaks in order to break them open. If you have a bigger beak and you can get more food, that means you have more energy. If you have more energy, that means you can make more babies. If you have more babies, you have greater fitness. And if you have greater fitness, the next generation, your genes, your traits, like a big beak, are going to make up a larger proportion of the population because more big beak birds had babies than small beak birds. And so that average beak size is going to shift. So what we were just talking about is a type of selection called directional selection. So this is when natural selection is favoring one extreme of a trait over the other. So in this case, it's favoring big beaks over small beaks. And so our standard curve of the ratio of different types of beak sizes is going to shift towards larger because more of the population has bigger beaks. Another form of selection type we're going to see is stabilizing. So this is where selection is acting against both extremes, not just one or the other. It's favoring that mean phenotype. So you can think about this like with jungle cats and their tail length. Having a really, really short tail does not help them with balance. So that causes a problem and maybe they fall out of a tree. Having too long of a tail and maybe it's dragging on the ground or getting tangled in branches and you're no longer as effective as a hunter. So you need that medium length tail for providing you with both balance, but also stealth. So selecting against these extremes, and our bell curve is getting taller and narrower. Finally, we have disruptive selection. So this is selection against the mean, where it's better to have both extremes, but not somewhere in the middle. A great example of this, going back to the birds, is maybe all that's available are those hard nuts and seeds or insects within tiny little holes. And so a really, really narrow, thin beak is great for getting insects. A really big beak is great for getting seeds. But if you have a medium-sized beak, you can't crack open the seeds. You can't reach and find the insects. And so you're just kind of out of luck. So that would be disruptive selection. So let me give you an example here. We start applying pesticides to some bugs in order to grow some crops. And most of the bugs are going to die off, with the exception of a very small percentage of the population has a gene that gives them resistance to the pesticide, meaning they can survive when the pesticide comes by. So you spray the crops, and most of the ones that are not resistant die off, whereas all of the resistant ones are still around. So after one application, when it was mostly non-resistant, now all of a sudden, as they reproduce, it's about 50-50 split. You spray again, and now all of a sudden, a majority of your bugs are going to be these resistant ones because they're the majority of the ones that are surviving and reproducing. So we're moving away from one extreme, non-resistant, and towards another extreme, resistant. What type of selection would this be? That would be our directional. We're going towards one direction and away from another. The last type of selection I want to talk about here is going to be sexual selection. So this is traits that may show off that you're very fit and are going to aid in reproduction, but they are not meant for survival. They're not meant for helping you gather energy. They just help you attract a mate. In many cases, sexually selected traits could really hurt your survival chances. So a classic example are these birds of paradise. There's lots of different types of birds of paradise, but they're really well known for having these really flashy and elaborate mating rituals. Maybe they build an elaborate nest. Maybe they have really weird coloration. Maybe like this guy, he puffs up all his feathers and tries to hypnotize the female by doing this elaborate dance to seduce her. But this doesn't help him get food. This doesn't help him survive avoiding any jungle cats or predators. It's just to get a mate. And so it's theorized that this is because if you can survive with this ridiculous looking blue plumage where you're just highlighting yourself to predators, but you can still stay alive, it tells females, wow, that whole thing may look dumb, but he must be really strong in other ways to have all this stupid looking stuff and still survive. So these traits aid in finding a mate, not necessarily survival, but it may imply you have other traits not necessarily represented by this display. It implies you're probably pretty good at surviving if you can look at like this and still survive in the jungle. So a great example of a form of selection that's driving us towards certain traits and away from others. All right, that's it for chapter 21. See you in class.